Good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So I'm confused about a variety of things. Shocking. It seems like I would, after my 50s now, I turned 56 a couple days ago, and you just had a birthday as well. Was it yesterday or?
A couple of, yeah, well, I don't even know what today is. The 17th, 4 days ago.
Exactly. So we're both a day or a year older and supposedly wiser. So it surprises me that I'm just surprised every day, it seems like, by friends' comments and by the way media says things and by the way elected officials now lead if they're leading. The whole world confuses me right now. I don't think I'm alone. And well, here's the reason I thought of this. I know you don't know where I want to take this conversation, so I'm telling you. Power, it seems like all my conservative friends, all of them, it seems like, are just really aggrieved about all sorts of stuff. They're aggrieved about social media and the powerful interest. They're aggrieved about media. They're aggrieved about unfair elections. They're aggrieved about what Democrats are doing and how they're doing it, etc. And that, I guess, in Colorado makes sense because they're the minority party. They don't control the House. They don't the Senate, they don't control the governor's office, they don't control the Congress, they don't control the presidency, they don't control anything. And so I guess aggrievement is one way of complaining. And so then in a way that makes sense. But here's what doesn't make sense to me. All my liberal friends are aggrieved. They think it's unfair and the system's rigged. Powerful interests are going to take over and Trump is going to get reelected and these companies and their money are affecting everything. And it's just an unfair system and unions are trying to form and they're getting busted up. And media isn't actually all liberal. Look at how much conservative media there really is. And social media is so angry you can't participate. So they're aggrieved. So everybody's aggrieved. And I just don't get why we're all in this weird, sad, mad, fearful of things happening. So what I wanted to ask you, that's the setting of why I thought about asking you. But I wanted to ask you about, is there anything really different right now in America? I mean, when we founded the country, there was a rich person, the king, and we were mad at him. So what did a bunch of other do? Some fairly wealthy, but maybe I'm wrong. You're the historian. To me, I kind of makes common sense that a bunch of wealthy white male landowners would rally the troops, so to speak, and say, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to set up a different system. But did a bunch of poor people found our country? Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I guess I reject the premise of the assertion that it was a bunch of wealthy white landowning men. That's a
who had power in the founding of our country. Who had power?
Well, before the founding of our country, the monarch had power,
and also, but not just the monarch, right? Weren't there powerful corporate interests before the founding of the country?
Sure, and that's what we were sort of born in the middle of this struggle between over parliamentary supremacy, and that it represented a unique time in English history because of the fights that were going on back in England, and in a way we were kind of swept up in what was for them an internal fight over making this argument that Parliament needed to be supreme over the monarch at precisely the time that the colonies were trying to figure out their own place. And then out of the hundreds of British colonies, only 13 of them broke away. The other hundreds, it depends on where you start and stop your markers, but there were more colonies that stayed with the British system than broke away.
You're talking around the world?
Not just that, but in North America. I mean, there was something like 200 colonies in the Western Hemisphere or something like that.
So you're just talking Western Hemisphere. You're not talking about India and Australia, and you're talking Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, and it depends on what you count, like a port as being a colony. So I'm being a little fuzzy with the numbers, but by almost any definition, you'd say they had about 100 different things in the Western Hemisphere that might be called a colony, and only 13 of them broke away because of the unique argument that they were making about the nature of what sovereignty should be, and that would be self-government of the individual. So
okay, that's helpful context, and I guess we can keep exploring it, but I want to get to that where you had some rebuffing. Blame my primary education in Littleton, Colorado. I really thought it was wealthy male white landowners that are, they're the founders, they're the signers, they're the.
I guess, but when we say wealthy, like they weren't wealthy like European monarchs, but I guess you could say they were wealthy in comparison to most people around the world, because the colonies were wealthy compared to most people around the world. But in terms of the power that they were exercising, they were actually exercising on behalf of other people who had elected them. So it wasn't necessarily their wealth that gave them their power. So it's kind of distracting to keep referring to them as a bunch of, they weren't granted power or authority because of the color of their skin or because of their wealth. They were granted the ability to represent other people.
But Professor, doesn't it kind of beg the question, and I don't know whether I'm being a devil's advocate or truly trying to learn or just having a conversation with a friend, and in any and all and others. In order to even run for office, so whether it was in 1776 or rebel against the king in 1776 or form a constitution later, you had to have some means. If you're a subsistence farmer, just barely making it, you're not going to go, you know what, I'm going to go talk to a neighbor and see if he'll elect me as the, whatever they had, supervisors or something back then, or the county sheriff. You had to have some additional time of your day in order to think big thoughts, right?
Well, you had to have most voting took place via a property qualification. So you had to usually own some sort of land. And then most law was centered around what the primary economic unit was, which would have been a family. So, so the authority over your sort of primary economic unit, the family, and then people tended to, nobody, as the old Dennis Miller joke goes, nobody finds God on prom night. But it's also true that if you're starving to death, you are primarily concerned with not starving to death. So when you say you had to be someone of some means, just saying that this was, a government created by a bunch of people who weren't starving to death would have made them among the wealthiest people in the world in 1776. So
that sounds like a Monty Python skit, actually. They're not, hey, there's some lovely muck over here. And
there's some lovely filth down here. So in some sense, if you want to call them wealthy, you're being technically correct and you're being contextually correct, but it's a little bit misleading in a kind of modern sense, because if you're telling somebody in a modern context, oh, these people were all wealthy, it sort of conjures up a very different image, rather than saying, no, you're forgetting just how poor the rest of the world happened to be at the time. The fact that these people owned land would have made them among the wealthiest people in the world. The fact that they weren't starving to death made them among the wealthiest people in the world. So
I'm trying to imagine
today.
Well, I'm trying to imagine my liberal friends, which some will listen to this at some point, and they'll say, the professor's right, and it's exactly the same thing today. They are renters. They can't afford to buy a home in at least Colorado. They're going to be a renter forever. They're never going to be able to create intergenerational wealth. They're living paycheck to paycheck. They don't have good health insurance. They're a health issue away from starvation or poverty or homelessness or bankruptcy, at least.
But I would say, like, not incorrect, but let's put it in a broader context. Even today, if you're someone who has a job of any kind and you are earning minimum wage, you're in the wealthiest 3% of the people in the world today.
And
So
we're going to
you
have
know,
that conversation
be careful who when you begin condemning the wealthy. That you are probably, if you're somebody who is married and has a dual income of any kind, you're probably in the wealthiest 1% of the people in the world. So be careful when you condemn the rich 1%. You might be talking about yourself.
Fascinating. Well, remember, that's a different conversation we may have as early as next week. So let me, since we've already gone 12 minutes, as we always, it seems like time just flies when we're having a conversation. I got your point. Not positive I agree with it, but it's interesting for me to absorb that. Then in the period before the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, Articles, I think that you were called that, Articles of Confederation, is that? It just wasn't quite working. There wasn't enough central government. And so a bunch of wealthy people, I got your point, but where was the power and control that said, this ain't working, we're going to fix it. We're going to go to Philadelphia, we're going to send some delegates, and we're going to fix this and make a different power structure in America. Where was the power and control concentrated?
Well, power is supposed, I mean, the point of the American Revolution is that power is supposed to flow from the vote. And the problem under the Articles of Confederation was that rule of law was kind of slipping away, and you can't really have a peaceful political process without rule of law. And so this concept of ordered liberty is something we've discussed many times. But in order for people to live at peace with one another, you must have rule of law and a system of order. Otherwise, civil society can't function. And the reason why the Constitution was necessary was to make it possible for rule of law to function. But bigger question, it was true then, it's true now. If the most correct answer to your question of where power comes from in the American system is the vote.
Okay, so, but again, there wasn't just one guy, me, born in unincorporated Arapahoe County, who kind of got his dander up and decided to run for county commissioner and win. Okay, I did. And I didn't come from any power, zero power. I mean, I was one neighbor. I was a neighbor power. And I guess my dad owned his home, so we're not from poverty, but but you don't just go, hey, let's form a constitution and let's start talking to other smart guys if you're trying to break bread.
But I'm answering your question. When you were a county commissioner, you were vested in this authority by the other people who voted for you. They were granting you their political authority via their votes. So it's no different for you being a county commissioner versus someone who was sent to the Constitutional Convention. Your power comes from the votes of the people who voted for you.
So let me ask it in this way, because I want to hone it in on two other periods of history. I tell people all the time that don't run for office unless you're young and poor or old and rich. Because if you're just trying to make a living and raising your family and caring for your parents and paying bills and trying to run a business or trying to be in business, trying not to get fired, I think it's really hard to be truly ethical when there are power.
Your audio cut out, but I think I got the gist of your question, which is it's hard to be ethical when you're running for office. Was that the gist of it?
Okay, where did I lose you, Professor?
You said it's hard to be ethical, and then
sorry. It's hard to be ethical when you're in the middle ground. When you're trying to pay bills, you're trying to raise your kids, you're trying to work at a job or create a job, you're trying to have healthcare, and it's just really hard, I think, to be like lower middle class running for office. If you're poor and you don't mind being poor, I think you can go out and organize people for free. You don't have to hire consultants. You just go out and knock on doors and raise hell and get some earned media. And I think you can do pretty well when you're poor and don't owe, if you don't owe the man anything. I think you can be pretty ethical and straightforward and And also if you're rich and you don't have anything to lose, you own your home and you're retired now, or you have some kind of residual income, heck, you can just do what you want to and not be beholden to powerful interests. So when I was a county commissioner, I went to a powerful law firm and got a bunch of partners to give me money, and that created flyers and mailings that some of my opponents in the Republican Party didn't have. I became a county commissioner. I think I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps and just did it all on my own. I truly do. Well, yeah, but I also went to a powerful law firm and had a bunch of, and so I'm asking, where does the power exist in America? Everybody thinks that somebody's controlling them. It seems like today, it seems like they think education is, or media is, or billionaires are, or, I don't know why everyone's so aggrieved. So I'm trying to figure out where the power lies in America. Is it with media? Is it with billionaires or millionaires? Or is it really with just people? I
mean, candidates and voters. Yes. The people who choose to run for office and the people who vote for them. That is still where all power and authority,
I don't think anyone believes you. I think they think the Koch brothers or George Soros, the two extremes of billionaires, are ruling who gets to run for office and who gets to vote for him.
Yeah, I don't know where that would be incorrect, but.
Okay.
Yeah, right. I mean, I just consulted. So, I mean, just yesterday I consulted with a local candidate. I mean, we have a lot of congressional districts that are often decided by a few thousand votes. Yeah, sure. And I would say it depends on the size of the election campaign that you're running. So, if you're talking about something for local office that involves less than 5,000 votes. Then you can run pretty cheaply. Flyers and door knocking is by far the most effective.
And even if some rich interests out there wants to kick you out, you can kind of overcome that with power of personality at their own doorstep, where you can't hire some loser to go knock and say you're a loser, so you can actually overcome that, right?
Well, you can, but especially in local office, but one of the things that's kind of depressing to think about is that negative campaigning really does work. So
it does.
You can have an outside interest that will come in and spend a lot of money on negative campaigning, and it will often cause you to lose a race.
Even at 5,000 votes, you think, or is that kind of the?
Yeah, it can still, because somebody could, and we've seen this happen in California a few times. We'll have it's all at the margins. I mean, it's funny. I just saw a breakdown of what Trump's actual influence is within the Republican Party in the last election, and they're starting to be able to slice it and dice it and say, what does it mean? How much does Trump help or hurt an endorsement? And it's about 3%. So you can't say it's nothing, but it's not. It's not overwhelming, and the same goes with the effect of negative campaigning. You can counter the effect of somebody deciding to spend $1 million and sponsor a candidate, but that means that you've got to go out and reach those voters pretty directly. You've got to work harder. It matters. It's each of these things can bump your margins by 3%, 5%, 7%. And so it's as complicated as what it takes to get each individual voter to mark your name.
Okay. Well,
but it still comes down to the vote. It still comes down to the individual voter marking your name, and that's it. Whatever it takes to get that to happen.
Okay, let's skip that for now. And Lorraine, or Mayor Anderson, I hope you jump in when we go to Q&A in just 10 minutes on, especially, I'm not sure you understand my point yet, but that's it doesn't matter. I want you to ask your question. So Professor Toole, I'm jumping to another period throughout history. And I haven't looked this up in 40 years since I was in junior high school or high school. There was the robber baron era, and then there was trust busting. There have been periods in history where it seems like there's been outside influence of control, where those people in their votes through their elected officials said, yeah, they got too much power. And so we're going to break this baby up.
I think Yeah, I would say
Now,
your impression of that era is probably exactly wrong.
you see,
Because
darn public education. I'm not a critic of public education.
it's not the fault of public education. It's the fault of like structural racism and the Southern interpretation of American history that needed to, condemn that entire era. So that's another thing that happened, was that because of this combination of progressive historians and Southern racists that needed to paint this era in this negative light. But at precisely the moment that you would say, oh, these robber barons are having this outsized influence, is precisely the time in American history when voter participation was at an all-time high. So it is, in fact, the most democratic, and with no incentives, by the way, like by any measure, if you said we have 80-90% participation in voting processes when people still had to go to a lot of effort to vote and we're receiving no incentives to do so, there was no mail-in ballot, and that political participation in political parties as a part of your everyday life was also at a all-time high, you would say that both political engagement and voter participation was at an all-time high. And thus, in terms of being representative of the will of the American people, it was at precisely the era that you're talking about.
You're saying the power still related to who could vote and if they decided to vote for a candidate. That's where the power in America lies.
Yeah, I'm saying that if you were to measure these things and say who is the most popular president in American history, you'd have a good argument that the most popular presidents in American history are all the ones that nobody bothers to study, all the ones with beards in the late 19th century, and maybe the most popular would be William McKinley, who didn't have a beard, but these were the presidents that had the highest number of votes in the time with the highest voter participation.
But powerful corporate interests didn't rule the world.
No, they were certainly influential, and yeah, they could certainly do things that would affect the American economy in devastating ways. And you could say, yeah, I think it is a little bit scary in a certain sense that a handful of very rich people were in control of the American economy.
So wait, we do agree on that then?
Yes.
At what era?
That would be the Gilded Age. Yeah,
Okay.
that would be in the years before the Federal Reserve System was. But
Okay.
but you have to also remember the reason why that existed in the first place was because the people of the United States chose to destroy the Bank of the United States. So
go into that a minute or two. That doesn't ring a bell to me.
Oh, Andrew Jackson decided that the Bank of the United States needed to be destroyed. It was a center of too much power and influence within the government of the United States, and thus we ceased to have a central bank. And when we ceased to have a central bank, if you want to have any kind of a functioning economy, you have to have some sort of control over how money flows throughout your economy. And when the government said, we're not doing this anymore, private bankers stepped in to do it. But it was the government gave this power to the private sector. It wasn't that the private sector simply took it. It was Andrew Jackson made the argument that that the Bank of the United States was a center of elitism and privilege, and it was a corrupting influence in the government of the United States. So, we have to get rid of the Bank of the United States, which means you don't get rid of money. You don't get rid of financial transactions. So what ends up happening is Wall Street becomes powerful as Philadelphia and the Bank of the United States recedes from authority, from its role controlling the economy. But yeah, you could honestly say that, a dozen real, and maybe even 3 really, really rich people were the ones who were controlling the American economy. But by and large, you can actually make a case they did a pretty good job of it. which is even more shocking. They certainly enriched themselves in the process, but the period where the government was not in control of our financial system was also the period of the most rapid economic growth in American history, where we see also working class people moving into the middle class for the first time, more people lifted out of poverty in any other place than in any other place and at any other time was during precisely those years as well. So the years after the Civil War up until World War I, was the time when our economic growth really exploded, along with economic growth in England as well. So, there are trade-offs, obviously, when you say we're going to put really rich people in charge of our economy. But if we're judging them just on wealth creation, they did a spectacular job.
Fascinating. Let me jump around twice more, and then I'm going to open up to conversation. And depending on whether Lorraine and Ben, I'm not sure I want to call on you with that damn hat or that outfit you're wearing.
The Swedish chef.
Yeah, exactly. But Douglas, it's good to have humor. So I was in Savannah, as you know, Professor, last week on business, and I'm a runner. So I had a chance to run through all 22 squares that are still in existence. And I think I took a picture of every single monument and every single plaque in order to kind of read later and kind of culturally see what at least Savannah in one state, Georgia, thinks what's important still to this day. And not because of the Civil War per se, but I was kind of looking at with an eye to that to see if there was anything that we need to take down or at least argue about. And I'm telling you, I had this revelation that out of the, and I'm making this up, I guess a quick Google site would tell me, but it seemed like 3/4 of all the statutes and monuments were about Revolutionary War heroes, military leaders. There was a random novelist, songwriter, I guess Jingle Bells or something was written there, and there was another cool novel written there. So there's a couple cultural norms. Almost all was over the Revolutionary War, and they were all carrying guns, and they were all proud to be a part of founding of America. So when I think of who really controls society, I do have some inclination to think that it's military or force. And in most countries today, it seems like that's true. If you're a commander and can convince your troops to take over, you can take over through your guns. Seems like that's the history of human relations. Am I wrong on that? Throughout history in most societies, is military where the power lies?
Well, it's still, you asked about power within the United States, but we're not in control of the whole world. So the rest of the world is still governed by accident and force, meaning violence. So when we are dealing with the rest of the world, we need to remember that the rest of the world is not made up of democracies. So when we are dealing with a country that has a functioning representative government and rule of law, then we can use things other than violence. But when we're dealing with any country that does not have a representative form of government, then yes, the world is still ruled by violence.
Yeah, so I'm partially correct around the world. In America, we're not controlled by violence, with the notable exception of, I guess, the Civil War. Correct?
Well, it was an attempt to use violence to undo the peaceful nature of our politics. That was just, everybody who attempts a robbery or commits a crime is doing the same thing. They are not following the rule of law, but we don't say that our just because someone is committing a crime, that doesn't mean we aren't still a society governed by rule of law.
Right. Well, Eisenhower, jumping up to the 50s, Eisenhower warned about the military industrial complex, right? They are a powerful interest. Who controls the United States? I'm not saying those 4 big defense contractors do, but they do have an outsized influence, don't they? If you want to even run for county commissioner or state legislator, there's lobbyists and money to be involved and checks to be written, and they're in every state, and they don't do that. They don't do that for production means. They do that for political Special interests.
I would say that that was a much bigger concern before our current debt crisis, because the shifting of responsibility. I mean, you could say that LBJ, Obama, and Biden have solved this problem for Dwight Eisenhower, in that now military spending is dwarfed by Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. So if you're looking for the corrupting influence into American politics now, the military is a shrinking in its influence, and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are swallowing up all other considerations.
Okay, so I'll follow your lead on that. Medicaid and Medicare, is that AARP and a variety of social interest groups that have tremendous outsized power?
Yeah, it's anybody who either receives or administers Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are by far the most powerful interest in driving American politics right now.
Okay, so we've and I don't disagree with that, actually. So we've reached a conclusion. Who really has power and control in the United States? Follow the money and see where the money is and see where their interests are.
I don't necessarily, well, it's how government is choosing to spend its money. I don't like the follow the money thing.
I know you don't. I know. I'm trying to just help people here.
Yeah, we're still human beings, and we have autonomy, and we can take control over ourselves and our political system anytime we want. But if you're talking about what happens if we're just on autopilot, if no one's thinking about this, who's grabbing the steering wheel? It's very easy right now to look at the outsized takeover of the federal government by spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and say this is clearly what is driving all our American political system, if no one is actively grabbing the steering wheel and pointing it in one direction or the other.
Okay, that's lots for me to think about. So thank you for that. But the one last jump I wanted to make was the FDR era. Seemed like that there must have been powerful interests that allowed the realignment of a power structure in the U.S. There must be money and power or people or something there. That was a major shift in U.S. history. And so I'm trying to identify what happened there.
Well, I would say yes, but in these cases, the most powerful thing that takes place is actually cultural. Because what changes is the expectation of the American people about what the role of government is supposed to be. And that ends up being far more powerful than any interest group. Is that before the FDR administration, we wouldn't have looked to the federal government in order to control the economy. Now, if the economy is good or if the economy is bad, what do? We blame the president of the United States, which seems rather strange. If we're having some sort of issue in our personal lives, we tend to look to the federal government first now. That's quite a cultural shift. If we see, I mean, you think about any cultural problem that you happen to care about at any given moment, school shootings, homelessness, whatever the issue is, the first thing we do is we look to the federal government for a solution, which is a revolutionary change that has taken place within the culture of the United States. To say that that's the first place that we would look, in other words, when something, it doesn't matter if there's a homeless person in the street or whatever the particular issue is, that the first place we go is the federal government. That's strange, or it would seem very strange to anyone who was familiar with the American government before FDR.
So give me your conclusion, then we're going to open up to Q&A here in just 1 minute, or once the professor answers this question. You don't like the way I'm phrasing any of this. I'm saying who controls the world, because everybody else seems to think somebody controls the world, then not them, through their own individual vote. They seem to think there's some nefarious interest going on. media, government, military, populists. I don't know. They think there's some outside influence out there. They don't want to look inward and figure out how they can help and change something, whatever the hell they want to change. So do you agree or disagree with me? Or more important than that, give your answer on who has power and control. Well, you already have. You saying it's people.
Yeah, I mean, I always begin with the premise that Nazis are really bad and slavery was really bad. And within the broader context, if you're not being put into a concentration camp and you are not enslaved, first of all, let's celebrate that fact, and assume that the person who is most, if you are currently not being violently compelled to do something, that the person who has the most control over your life is you. And that's always going to be the answer, as long as no one is using violence or compelling you to do something under the threat of violence. So then, once we get beyond that, you'd say who is, influencing your economic life would probably be the next thing, because that's the next thing we probably care about the most, is who is hurting or helping me and the people who I care about. And that's when we get into what I would consider things that are important, but are a part of regular politics and can be settled peacefully, although passions can certainly be high. But so that's why I say, like, the next most powerful person and the next most powerful thing in our society and culture is still the vote.
Wow. I hope Tony is able to upload this for us, because there's some really interesting tidbits you have in there for people to contemplate and expand further. So let's see if either Ben or Lorraine have a question for us today. Or otherwise, I'm going to delve down into it further. Lorraine, you may have heard, I think you signed on a little late. I said, I'm not sure if I'm being a devil's advocate or brainstorming or a friend or whatever. So I'm not sure what you would disagree with my ideas regarding this for local government. But Lorraine, if you're happy, please jump in. You can either take yourself off mute or video or both, or maybe you're out and about already. There you go. Lorraine, Mayor Anderson, what is your question or comment?
Well, my comment was, I think it depends upon the government and how it is chartered. When you talked about who has the power, and perhaps I misunderstood you, that the power comes from lobbyists because of the money involved in getting elected. So that may be true in governments that are chartered by the state or the US itself. But when you have a city like Arvada, which did their own charter and had thoughtful people on how to keep money from being the power source for city council. So I just have to think about that for a while.
Yeah, no, I get that. But Mayor, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind, and then we'll have Professor Tootle react to it. You were one of the most experienced elected officials in Colorado, not only in Arvada, but I think it was, Denver Regional Council of Governments, and then also the Regional Transportation District. You've been several different types of elected officials. Do you not agree that there are very powerful special interests that can influence elections? That can overcome the power of candidates knocking on doors, if it's important. If there's some keystone issue that all of a sudden riles somebody up, they're going to go, let's get rid of this council person or mayor or legislator or RTD board member. Do you have no concerns? Are you one of the whiners that I was referring to? Maybe you didn't hear that part of the conversation. Or no, you think everything's great, America's flourishing, and please stop complaining. This is what...
Well, I don't, I think I have to say America is probably the greatest place to be. But that doesn't mean it's perfect.
Right.
And yes, I do see and have seen how lobbyists and money can make differences in how laws are shaped and done. That being said, I suppose you could say, yes, they are still a part of our whole society. So they have perhaps a right to try to influence. So I don't have a problem with that. I just think it's more simple at the local level in a home rule city than it is probably at the state or even county government. So that was my point, John.
And I agree with that. Professor Tootle, after hearing Mayor Anderson, do you have a reflection or a comment on that?
No, I just think she's right. But I always like to have a somewhat, glib and I don't know, controversial take on it, is to sometimes remind people that lobbyists and special interest groups, we think that they're bad when they disagree with us, but not when they're representing us. Citizens have the right to form organizations to try to influence politics, and they do all the time. And no matter how evil you think of some lobbyist, we could say that, prison guards is probably the one that in California that got a lot of grief, and that's only if you're not a prison guard. Prison guards love their lobbyists in Sacramento, and I'm sure that there are examples of the same thing in Colorado. It doesn't matter. In a representative form of government, people will form other coalitions in an attempt to influence politics.
Pro-gun, anti-gun. There's a ton of groups out there to join.
Yeah, but if you look at dollars spent, the anti-gun is by far, I'm not sure if I should say by far, but I know that in terms of the dollars spent, if we look at just lobbyists spending money at the federal level, the gun lobby's way down the list. I forget, I haven't checked in years, but they were never even in the top 10 in terms of their influence doesn't come from money. It comes from the fact that they represent a perspective of a lot of people who want that viewpoint represented.
So Professor Tootle, I assume you have friends like I do that are passionate about issues, so they're mad or sad or, I don't think most of my friends don't troll, but some of them do, and I'm trying to get rid of those folks. But they're advocating their views. Yeah. And then you hear the folks that go, well, gosh, we really need a third political party because of pox on both their houses. Well, gosh, I've been twice now so far, and I might try a third, try to form a new political party. And I haven't been successful yet. But friends go, well, yeah, they have a lock on. It's just, you can't beat the duopoly. My libertarian friends just say that as well. And even though I haven't been successful, I kind of think that, well, I haven't tried hard enough, or I don't have the right message yet, or the timing's not right, or.
No, but you're right, because the regulation is a subsidy for the Republican and Democratic parties. So it is being in compliance. I'll again use an example. I've consulted with 2 local candidates within the last 2 months on this issue. You think about, if you choose to not be a part of one of the 2 political parties, you immediately have $100,000 bill, which is, you have to find a way to comply with campaign finance laws and campaign laws. And that means you have to hire a campaign manager and a campaign treasurer. And even if you're hiring both these people for half a year, you got to find $100,000, or you play ball with one of the 2 political parties. But it's because of the regulations and the compliance issues. If you just said, for any race that doesn't, if you agree not to spend, $200,000 on your race, you can do whatever you want. I have a feeling that the party structure would crumble, because it's just trying to stay out of federal prison is what keeps these races expensive for a lot of these races, because a lot of these races you could very easily not spend $250,000.
Right. So we answered that question. Who has power and control? Kind of a historical regulatory approach to the political parties. They still have.
It's the same principle, and I always remind people of this, like, because they think we're going to regulate our way into controlling corporations. And the unintended consequence of regulating corporations is that you are subsidizing corporations, because then only large corporations can afford the regulations. So every time you pass a regulation against a corporation, you're usually making it more powerful. Even those designed to hurt them end up helping them. And we've got 120 years worth of evidence on this. This is something that we've been trying to regulate our way into having smaller corporations for 120 years, and it hasn't. And every regulation ends up making the corporations bigger. So
okay, yeah, this another really insightful thing I need to spend some time thinking about. Ben, you got to jump in on here, because I know you're madder than hell about a variety of things, but you guys it in this sense of politeness, which I appreciate, by the way, in diplomacy and kindness. But still, I know you're mad. You are. Tell us about why you're mad and who you think has power and control locally, state, federal, and because the professor's going to burn you here. Clearly, I've been trying all hour, and he seems to be burning me at every sense. So, Ben, it's your turn to get burned.
Well, I'm not sure I characterize myself as mad. I'm not like, was the network, whatever the movie was. Yeah. I'm mad. I'm not going to take it anymore. Yeah. No, not exactly that. Regarding who has power, I'm looking at what's going on at the moment politically. I agree with Professor Tootle in that the people who have the power are the ones that vote. Now, with that said, what's bothering me is what's going on the TV right now, where we have a opposite party trying to get someone elected from another party, and that's money. So that bothers me that that's going on.
You're talking about a Colorado issue about Democrats putting money into unaffiliated races to get Democrats to vote for a Republican. In fact, the worst Republican.
Yes.
Same thing happened in Pennsylvania too.
Is it going on in other places?
Yeah.
Okay. I had heard about other places. So that's good.
But that's what you're talking about, Ben, right?
That's exactly what I'm talking about, and that's money. So I kind of agree with both of you in that. Yes, voting has power, and yes, money has power, because we're seeing in our televisions we're getting blasted 3 times an hour with it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I as I tried to, these things can have an influence. You can't say that they don't work. You can't say that, but political scientists try to measure this influence. They say, oh well, in this race it was, it helped or hurt by 6% or 7% or 9%, and those are big margins in a lot of races, and often the margin of victory. So you're right. It is one of the consequences of the modern era that when you have an interest group, they are able to, largely through fundraising and small donations, if they swoop in, they can have an outsized influence in any place. But it works like terror works like a spotlight. If it's pointed at you, then it's a problem. And so most of our ability to avoid this stuff is just dumb luck, because we don't happen to be the focus of the attention. But I've been a part of some races where you say, well, this is a normal race. We got local people and local money, and then every now and then something would happen that would cause it to become a nationalized kind of issue, and all of a sudden you just have, wacky stuff starts happening. A bunch of paid everybody is paying $20 to $25 an hour for ballot harvesting and stuff like that, and you can really you can really move the margins. You can. I've seen races where outside money will swing the result by 8, 11 points, maybe. I'd have to go back and look, but I mean, that's a big swing. If you can just say, some rich guy, I forget the name of the guy, but his organization was called California Tomorrow, and just decided to spend tens of millions of dollars on a few select races. And in many cases, what's strange is because of gerrymandering and sorting, it didn't change a lot of, but you had people who were winning by 22% who are now only winning by 9, and you say, well, that's the outside influence. That's so I'm not disagreeing with you. It can, and that's where the pernicious role of money comes in politics, is anything that would cause you to be a national celebrity is probably a bad thing.
Okay. All right. I finally decided to ask you this question. Or Ben, do you have a follow-up?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
All right. I'll irritate both of you now. I don't know about Mayor Anderson. I have come to the conclusion that yes, corporations have the ability under our Constitution for speech. I think that's the definition of a corporation. It's a corporate body politic. And so all my liberal friends say, well, that's stupid. A corporation is not a person. Well, it has to be something. They can buy and sell property. They can, you have to define it in some way in order to allow it to be an entity, so you have a CEO and a board of directors, and it has the ability to do things.
Let me just agree with you right here. Like, corporations aren't people, but they're made up of people. You don't lose your political rights just because you've gotten together and incorporated. Yeah.
All right. Well, but by definition, though, you have one person, the CEO, that has the ability to act like a person, who can buy and sell property, who can contract, who can spend money, who can advocate their causes, who can hire lobbyists, who can put on a TV commercial like a person. So the Supreme Court ruled in Citizen United that, yes, corporations are people, and they can exercise their right to free speech. Go ahead.
Oh, I disagree with your characterization. It didn't actually say that corporations are people. That's
in effect they did, didn't they?
I don't know that I agree. I think it's more accurate to say that Americans don't lose their rights when they incorporate, rather than saying that a corporation is a person.
Yeah.
I think it's much more accurate to say that Americans don't lose political rights when they incorporate.
I love words and law. I just love that. Yeah. So I'm just going to skip that and maybe that's a different topic, but I love this discussion. The bottom line is a corporation can spend money on a political campaign, right?
Yes. A
lot of money. And in fact, unlimited amounts of money, as long as it's guised in the form of a Second Amendment, First Amendment. Right?
I need to stop you again. What the Supreme Court really said is that the government should not be in charge of limiting or deciding which corporations count as First Amendment protected corporations and which ones don't. This is like the Washington Post is a media company. NBC Universal they have a movie branch, but they also own news agencies. And what the Supreme Court said is that the federal government is not going to, say that this thing that's a newsletter published out of your house gets
Or a movie.
it gets free speech protection. But this guy, it does. And so all the Supreme Court was saying is that when people are that Americans get to have free speech, that newspapers get to publish ideas, and we're not going to make this distinction. If anything, I think that Citizens United didn't go far enough, because it said that we're setting aside this one special group of people who we can regulate, the political parties, but everybody else gets free speech rights, which had the effect of weakening political parties who exist only because of this, as I said earlier, regulatory subsidy of complexity, and everybody else gets to be unregulated. So we're only going to regulate things that are specifically political speech, but everybody else gets First Amendment protection. So that means that our political speech is the most regulated, and everybody else is less regulated, which I find bizarre. But what's the difference between when Ford Motor Company has a website where they're putting out news about Ford cars? Amazon has a corporate website where they're describing their goods and services and products, but somehow the New York Times, that is also a for-profit corporation that exists in order to make money, the product that they sell is news.
And opinion. News and opinion.
News and opinion, right? So all the Supreme Court says, we're not going to make this distinction. And that's what Citizens United essentially was. It was a...
You do understand how much, primarily my liberal friends, who cares about liberal people, hate Citizens United. They abhor it. I mean,
but that's because of this summary of the court decision as corporations are people, and I think that's why I interrupted you, because I think the more that we get people to understand what that Supreme Court decision actually said, and you'd say, well, all right, which entity gets to decide? And you say, oh, well, the government. And you say, well, does that mean President Trump? Because you want President Trump deciding that this is a media entity that the federal government can shut down, and this is a media entity that the federal government can allow to exist. And then they'll immediately say, well, no, obviously, I don't think that's the way it should be. And you say, well, that's what Citizens United decided.
All right. So now here's where you thought this is what was going to make you mad. Now I'm going to really make you and Ben mad. Ready?
All right.
I support a constitutional amendment. Has to be a constitutional amendment because of Citizens United. Can't be state, can't be a federal piece of legislation. It has to be a constitutional amendment that says if you cannot vote for or against a particular candidate, you can't spend any money in that election. So therefore, if in Colorado, if you're a corporate CEO or a billionaire or a labor union president or whoever you are in Colorado, and you can vote for governor or US senator, you can spend an unlimited amount of money for that governor, but you can't spend money on any other governor. You can only vote where you as a citizen can vote. Now, there are some elections where property owners get a vote, particularly in local districts. But unless you can vote for or against the candidate, you can't spend money. Your speech is limited. Yes, John Brackney is against the First Amendment. In something that's so important as our republic, you should only be able to influence folks for somebody you can vote for. So if you're a citizen of the United States, you can spend an unlimited amount of money for president of the United States. but only for 2 senators and only for however many Congress people in your state and only for your county commissioner or your city council person. Because then what I think it does is it emphasizes the power of the people in their own area. And yes, there'd be some crazy liberal areas and some crazy conservative areas and some mixed areas, but we wouldn't be have an outsized influence from California in Colorado, from California or Texas, unless they live here, their primary domicile. You think I'm in nuts? Am I like I'm destroying our republic? Or wait, no, John, you actually have some legitimate concerns about power and control, but I still don't like it. Here's your chance to rip into me. Heck, you can unfriend me, Professor.
You're nuts. That is completely bonkers. Because especially when you consider that for almost any political race, what the expense is media buying. And
right?
There would be absolutely no way to say that, for instance, if the New York Times decided that they were going to run articles that were exclusively helpful to Joe Biden, how is that not advertising for Joe Biden for everyone who subscribes to the New York Times within a specific congressional district? That is a corporation spending money in an area where they have no vote. They are doing this, and that's what the Supreme Court decided under Citizens United, is that this is an impossible regime, especially in the age of the internet. How can you say that what we're doing is we're building a website, we're buying YouTube advertising, but we're not specifying where it goes? We're
just hiring employees. You just hire some employees to advocate your railroad or airport or whatever, your widget. And those employees have a job to market their company. And part of that happens to supporting people that support the company. Yeah, it's an impossible task, is it not?
It would be impossible to tease out media influence in every possible regard that would require it would be such an affront to speech traveling across districts in order to comply with this from a regulatory standpoint, that you would, if you dedicated the entire federal government to it, I don't think they could accomplish this goal. So yeah, you're bonkers. Like,
love it. Can you smoke me greater than that, or do you just like concur with Professor Tootle's comments?
Actually, I'm going to yield my time to Mayor Anderson. She's got her hand up.
Love that. Mayor Anderson, you're up.
First of all, I think Colorado, the government itself, limits the amount that any person can spend on a campaign. But I have to just tell you a story about a candidate for our city council who had, 60,000 of outside money come in. That was from Boston, and everybody is saying, well, what does Boston have to do with Colorado, and particularly Arvada? So at least everybody knew that she had outside money. I believe she raised it with friends and family from where she's from, and she won. So the system still works because of the idea that you have to reveal who is giving you money. So I don't know. I guess I would have to disagree with you, John.
Oh my God, you think I'm bonkers too?
Well, and I would say that I would want to get rid of all of those limits, but I would want more transparency and more easily accessible transparency for precisely what Ms. Anderson said is.
All right, at least we're on the same page on transparency. In today's world, I am sick of, and I've had clients in the past and maybe in the future, that they hold checks and say, don't write the check yet, but we'll be able to pay for the media spend. The day the reporting's 30 days and prior to the election, just on the, I mean, the second, the day, so we don't have to report it till after the election. I mean, that's crap. It really is just crap. I think in today's world, we should have instantaneous reporting requirements. I mean, just the
Well,
moment
but
that comes
again,
in-
here's the thing that is difficult about this kind of stuff is when you think about local offices, small donations and cash where people just like stuff cash into a, you know, coffee can, you know.
well, less than $25, at least in Colorado or something. But yes, I get your point.
Yeah. But these things for when you are when you have an apparatus, you can afford it. But when you're a one person entity, that stuff becomes really onerous, and it's a real barrier of entry for politics. And so what we end up with that I find disturbing is, you know, we have these outside entities that will sponsor a candidate and essentially say, we're going to find somebody to run for office in this district, you know, and then we're going to.
That's getting more and more common, though, isn't it, Professor?
But here's why it's becoming more and more common, because as long as it's not a political party that's doing it, it's legal. That's what I mean when I say Citizens United didn't go far enough, because it means that every other entity in America gets to engage in political activities except for the parties. Which I find to be just a complete absurdity. I mean, we need to go. The decision just did not go far enough.
Fascinating. Okay, I got to do more research. So you're saying it's a good thing that I was a area captain as a Republican, and my co-area captain was married to a prestigious law partner who I could walk along the hallways of the law firm and collect $10,000 checks. So I had $10,000 because it allowed me to do what I wanted to do, because they didn't, not a single one of them asked me to do anything. Not
as
one.
Long as you, I would say, as long as you reported that.
Yeah, of course reported it. But I was also a private property rights person. I'm a conservative. So they had some clients who wanted to develop property. So maybe this guy's an okay guy, and that's it. But they never once lobbied me, ever once in my 2 terms. But it's because we were philosophically aligned, so they didn't need to lobby me.
But it's no different. You know, this is what, again, this is kind of what the Supreme Court said, is that like everything has some sort of monetary value. You know, and you can't say that. You know, as long as you aren't buying votes, all of this is supposed to be able to just simply get your message out to voters, who will then decide if they like you better than someone else. And that's kind of the way the system is supposed to work.
All right, we're going to end with this. I'm going to give you one last shot to change your mind. I don't think you're going to, but power and control in the United States lies with
the individual. But there are certain, but I would say I'm not naive enough to say that there aren't groups of people and organizations that have an outside influence in their ability to harm others. When it's a group of people targeting an individual, they can certainly do a lot of damage. And that the danger always, I mean, we talk about this a lot, but the danger always comes from the mob. You know, and that mob can have an outsized influence, and that is one of the reasons why our Constitution exists, is to protect the rights of the unpopular individual from the power of the mob, the self-interested mob. You know, that's why you have to have a system of ordered liberty, and not simply what we had under the Articles of Confederation, which is the translation of the desires and the emotions of the majority into government action. So I think we need to lean into our constitutional forms rather than reject them now.
Love that. One last question. And then we're shutting it off. Your An optimist, a realist, a pessimist? Where are you? How are we in America? Should we see, as I started, I'm telling you, my friends, I'm not lying. You can look at my own Facebook feed. There are a ton of my friends who are frustrated, sad, angry, think they're being manipulated. The world is out of control. And I have some empathy for that. I get it. But you, having said all that, whatever our problems are, you're an optimist, pessimist, realist, or whatever else you would like to explain.
I don't know. We have deep cultural problems in the United States based on, by far, the most pernicious threat to a system of incentivized peace is the promise of security. And that is a cancer on a free society. But it's a cancer that can be managed and it can be controlled and it can be studied if you have the proper cultural institutions. And what I worry about over the long term are our cultural institutions. But as
we're talking service organizations, religious institutions, nonprofits, NGOs. Oh, you're talking about all sorts of stuff.
I think it's families, neighborhoods,
so informal institutions.
Schools. Yeah, but it's starting with families, neighborhoods, schools, towns, newspapers, colleges, universities, and media institutions. But it begins with the individual, then the family, then the extended family, then your street, then your town, then your city, then your college, then your university. And at every one of these stages, that's where we have to be having these deeper discussions about culture that hopefully we're a part of.
Yeah, and we are a part of it. Professor, thank you for your time. I've got another appointment, so I got to head out. So no after chat. Last call, Ryan or Ben? Last call? You're good? Thumbs up? All right. Professor, thank you. There were some really good insights on this. So bravo. Very much appreciate your time.
Thanks. You too.
Right.
Other than that wacky idea, that was bonkers.
Oh, I love getting ripped
Tell anybody that again.
For posterity on the internet. John's an idiot. Hooray.
You're not an idiot. You're just somebody who hadn't quite thought through the implications.
I'm not there yet. I'm not sure you've convinced me. I just appreciate getting ripped into.
Just think about this one thing. How would you stop information from flowing into a specific voting district?
Damn, you're just
think about that.
Solve the wounds. Solve the wounds, Professor. Solve the wounds. Have a wonderful day.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys.